England is the most densely populated country in Europe after Malta, with a density that surpasses even that of Holland. Take a trip through the Dutch countryside, however, and then a trip through the countryside of England, and it will seem to be quite the other way round. Holland is chock-a-block with houses, roads, warehouses, factories, and unsightly business parks. At night the whole sky is aglow with light pollution, and you feel always in range of traffic noise. England, by contrast, offers green fields and woodland, country lanes between quiet villages, landscapes in which the dominant landmark is a church steeple or a country house, and here and there a night sky in which you can still see the stars. For miles on end the place seems inhabited only because the fields and hedgerows, gates, walls and copses remind you that there must be people looking after it. And that is the real difference with Holland. England is a country that has been looked after, not as a place to build and use, but as a place to appreciate for its beauty. It is a country whose inhabitants have loved it, not merely as a means for their economic purposes, but as an end in itself. Not entirely, of course, but sufficiently to impede the worst of the destruction that might have come from the Industrial Revolution and from the successive population explosions, through one of which we are living now. Our countryside is beautiful because people have made it so and have wished to keep it so. When the Industrial Revolution threw its future into doubt, people began to combine in order to protect it. The Lakeland poets agitated against the industrialization of the countryside, and the art critic and social philosopher John Ruskin devoted a lifetime of literary labour to the cause of conservation. Ruskin's disciple Octavia Hill was instrumental in founding the National Trust in the 1890s, so setting the pattern for popular movements, trusts and societies devoted to the cause of beauty. This pattern, which is not replicated elsewhere in Europe, quickly became part of the national culture. It also turned itself into a real political force, with the Town and Country Planning Association, founded in 1899, the Campaign for the Preservation, subsequently Protection, of Rural England, and 100 smaller civic initiatives encouraging people to lie down in front of the bulldozers. The mobilization of the literary elite by the architect Clough Williams Ellis, leading to the publication of England and the Octopus in 1928, resulted eventually in the Town and Country Planning Act of 1947. This spelt the commitment of post-war governments to the Green Belt principle and the end of ribbon development. That history needs to be borne in mind when we address the housing crisis in our country. Current resistance to new housing arises from a deeply embedded love of natural beauty, a desire to retain the boundary between town and country, and a long tradition of protest against unsightly development. The English countryside is an icon of our national inheritance, a symbol of what we are. It was the source of inspiration in the art and literature of the 2 world wars, has been the heart of our children's stories, and forms the background to everyone's dream of retirement. It is home for us, and the place that we long for when travelling abroad. I don't say everyone shares those sentiments, but they are sufficiently strong to have dictated the politics of planning in this country, and to have secured our country from the kind of unsightly ribbon development and industrial overspill that now ruins the landscape in many parts of Eastern Europe. The Green Belt policy expresses the determination that the countryside will not be swallowed by the towns, and ever since the war it has been assumed that the default position when it comes to building in rural areas is no. Politicians have a lamentable tendency to see every question in economic terms. It's the economy, stupid, as President Clinton put it under questioning, but whether the stupidity attached to the question or the answer might reasonably be doubted. When it comes to the identity and beauty of our country, it is precisely not the economy we are talking about. Beauty is not a means but an end, part of the definition of what we are and hope for, and without that definition, economic life is pointless. This has been tacitly endorsed by the many who have subscribed to the National Trust, which today has 4 million members. These people understand that there are values which cannot be measured in economic terms and which will always be more important than material prosperity. Two policies seem to me to be necessary if we are to retain the beauty of England. We must build properly in the towns, and when we build in the countryside, we must make beauty our priority. Post-war development in our cities has been a disaster. Thanks in part to modernist building types and their advocacy by the architectural profession, and in part to socialist dogma, whole areas of our cities were torn down and replaced by tower blocks, without streets or shops or meeting places. The result of this was the loss of communities and the eventual flight of the population to rural areas. The policy was justified by arguing that by building high you increase the density of population. That argument is provably false. Research carried out by the organisation Create Streets has established beyond doubt that the traditional terraced street, laid out in the familiar way, achieves greater population density than the normal high-rise estate, while opening the way to shops, theatres, schools and places of worship, and so forming the hub of a settled community. Moreover, as the research also establishes, the majority of families who live above the second floor of buildings in our cities are placed there by town councils or housing associations. In other words, they are not volunteers, but conscripts. The evidence is overwhelming that the high-rise estate is unpopular with its residents. It is also unpopular with the rest of us, who have never, despite all the propaganda of the architects, accepted these unsightly gashes inflicted on the skyline of our towns. Surely the time has come to tear down the post-war estates and to recover the old street lines that they extinguished. As for London, the most beautiful parts of which are now mutilated with clunky gadgets designed by modernist nerds for faceless multinational predators, we can only hope that our new mayor will appoint some better architectural advisers than the last one before it is too late. But we must build in rural areas too. The dispersal of populations cannot be easily reversed, and our rural towns and villages have garnered small-scale industries and service suppliers that make them centres of expanding communities. We must therefore ensure that the new housing will not detract from the beauty of the landscape. As we know, every proposal for development will be greeted by protests from existing residents, who lose the amenity of a quiet neighbourhood or a beautiful view. And the developers and planners will be quick to dismiss the protesters with the NIMBY label, not in my backyard. However, people don't, as a rule, want to stop development. They want to ensure that development, if it occurs, looks right. Not MIMBY, but BIMBY, beauty in my backyard. At present, public consultation begins when the land has already been chosen and the density of housing has been settled by the accountants. Just a few tweaks remain before permission is granted. The community is asked for its opinion only when it is too late to do anything very much about it. That is the root cause of the many protests, and the solution is to ensure the community's involvement from the outset. Existing residents have a greater investment in the character of the place where they live than any developer could possibly have. They must be given the chance to choose not only the land to be developed, but also the kind of development, the style of building, the materials and details. All the real choices, the aesthetic choices, should be theirs. Luckily, this is now feasible. The Prince's Foundation has developed a toolkit devoted to promoting beauty in my backyard. This lays out a step-by-step process whereby communities, planners and developers can work together for a result acceptable to all of them. Not surprisingly, the Foundation has discovered, people choose styles, details and street plans which are a fitting and harmonious extension of what they already have. They come up with just the kind of scheme for rural housing as Create Streets now advocates for the towns. So here is the real solution to our housing problem. Demolish the high-rise estates, create streets in place of them, and provide all planners and local communities with the BIMBY toolkit.